mode.
Hello, and welcome to IGI's webcast, Practical Strategies for Software Project Success. In today's webcast, Kurt Bittner will share with attendees why delivering wants rarely works and some proven techniques for getting to real needs. My name is Leanne, and I'm the moderator for today's session. A few notes to mention before we begin. Everyone on this webcast is on mute, except the presenters. So if you have a question, we will be taking questions at the end of the session after Kurt presents. You can submit those via the GoToWebinar question function in your panel. So you can submit those at any time during the webcast, and I will ask those questions to Kurt at the end, and he'll attempt to answer all of them. In introduction to Kurt, Kurt is Chief Technology Officer of IJI. He has worked in the software industry for more than 25 years in a variety of roles, including developer, team leader, architect, project manager, and business leader. He was a key contributor to the early development of the Rational Unified Process, as well as more recently IBM's JAZ project. His experience includes significant work in banking and finance, relational database system design and architecting, and consulting and mentoring a wide variety of clients on software development improvement strategies and approaches. He is the co-author of Use Case Modeling, Managing Iterative Software Development Projects, and the Economics of Iterative Software Development. Ivor Jacobson International is a global IT services organization helping software organizations improve their way of working to deliver successful software projects. And at that, I'll pass it over to Kurt to begin the presentation.
Okay, thank you, Leanne, and thank you everyone for joining today. This topic is particularly interesting for me because I think that it's an area where we have the opportunity by some subtle changes in behavior to have an important change in the overall results that projects can achieve. So I'm going to take you through why I think that and give you some strategies for how to start making those changes. So one of the things that I've noticed over the last couple of years, so we see a lot of statistics on, let's see, there we go. See a lot of statistics on project failure and project success. So I'll take you through a survey in a moment. But on the agenda, so we're going to talk first about why delivering wants, or basically the things that people ask for, rarely works and why you need to dig deeper. Give you some techniques for getting to those real needs. Talk about how to overcome resistance to working in a new way. And then how to use that new way of working to influence the project success criteria, which often drives the behavior on projects. So as I was mentioning, there are quite a few different surveys on project failures. One of the notable ones is the Standish Group's Chaos Report. You probably are familiar with that. And the Chaos Report, the numbers vary, but it varies between 60 and 75 or so % of projects fail to achieve the initial objectives in terms of meeting the needs or delivering what's asked for in the amount of time available and the amount of budget available. Now, I'd like to dig a little bit deeper into some of those numbers, and this particular survey from Dr. Dobbs a number of years ago is an interesting one because this is coming from project teams, and what they were reporting, and I've highlighted a couple of the important findings for this particular discussion, is that users expect functionality they didn't ask for. Almost everybody reports that, and that users demand functionality that they never use, and the majority of people report that. So those two things tell me that a couple of things are happening. One is that it's not a very reliable strategy to simply go and ask people for all the things that they want and then deliver those and expect success. So there's obviously some additional filtering and digging and investigation that's required in order to figure out what the real needs are. And so that's primarily what we're focused on here. The opportunity is uncovered in one of the sort of footnotes in the Standish Group's Chaos Report. And one of the interesting tidbits in there that relates to this is that of the projects that succeeded, so 60 to 70 or more % fail, but of the projects that were successful, something in the neighborhood of 30% of the requirements of many of those projects were never actually used. So even on the successful projects, there's a significant opportunity for improvement of their ability to deliver just what's needed, no more, no less, and that would improve schedule and budget performance as well. So if we think about that, how to improve that project success rate, oftentimes the strategy is we'll get better requirements, and sometimes people interpret that as, well, we're going to do a more comprehensive job of gathering requirements, which are often just wishes and wants, or they're going to focus more on traceability, or they're going to have a tool or things like that. And what I'm saying here is that you can get a lot better on that, on delivering what people actually need, simply by changing the way that you ask questions and focusing more on needs, and instead of simply responding to everything people ask for, which of course is impossible given the usual budget and schedule constraints. So as we move on, the problem with delivering these wants is that, first of all, users don't know what they want. They have some vague ideas about what the solution might look like, and it often takes developing something and showing it to them and getting feedback on that to zero in on it. So they don't know what they want, but they know what they don't want when they see it. And as we look at sort of agile and iterative approaches, one of the benefits of those approaches is that it gets something executing in front of the user sooner, so that they can start giving you feedback on whether that's actually what they think they really want or what they really need. So that's a benefit. We can certainly do that. We can also do a better job at asking questions and focusing on the right issues earlier, which is what we'll talk about today. The second point about why delivering wants rarely works is that basically what they want sometimes reflects more their personal preferences than it does the real needs of the business. So everybody comes into their jobs and every aspect of their lives with a particular personal perspective, and what I've found is that many times the business representative on projects, they've had a long-standing list of things that they wish that they could do, and sometimes those aren't really supported by the way that the business needs to work. In other words, they have a very particular idea of how the system should work. They don't like the way that it works in the current system. They want to fix that, and so they focus a lot on user interface and a lot of other things. That might not be the best way to solve the end problem. Maybe the best way would be to change something in the business process, or to focus in some other area. So listening to one person, you can broaden your scope of people that you're talking to, or you can try to figure out some way of correlating what they're asking for with what's really needed by the business. But ultimately, we need to get past the personal preference. Another point is that oftentimes we're not talking to the right user. So we might get the person who's available, whereas the person who would be most valuable to talk to is too busy to spend time with the project team. So we need to make sure that we're getting the right representation, or perhaps a good sample of both visionary type thinking, as well as people who perhaps have more time available. So choosing the right representative is an important thing, and that's also something that we need to spend some time on. And then, so as I say, oftentimes these people are not particularly visionary or insightful, and so many times the business representative can be a great source of information on how the process works now. But if you want to go beyond that and say, well, what would happen if we were to change this business process? Sometimes they don't have the insight into that, and perhaps don't feel empowered to speak to that issue or to change the business process. So you have to figure out a way to get to the right people. So a couple of things I like to keep in mind. This visual on the slide is a mental picture that I have of what happens when you just start adding features to a system without thinking about the overall usability or what we're trying to accomplish. So you end up with basically a massive system or a massive product that has all sorts of different features, each one of which isn't particularly usable, and collectively is completely impractical. So the thing about adding features that don't address some root causes or address some real need is that it just adds to complexity and cost without really adding any benefit. So we want to step back from just looking at large lists of features and thinking that more features are better, and that's why I like this particular picture of this Swiss Army knife, is that I think anybody would say that in this particular case more features are not better, that it's all sort of rather confusing, and each one of those particular features on this knife isn't very usable because it's embedded in this huge unwieldy thing. So the problem with this, when we ship a system that isn't very usable or doesn't meet real needs, it damages credibility. Then we've all probably either heard of examples or personally experienced examples where we delivered everything that somebody asked for and yet they still weren't happy and satisfied. So we really need to think sometimes of our business representatives as they're not necessarily their own worst enemy, but they don't necessarily know what's good for them. And so part of our job is to figure out what's really good for them, and in the process we have to figure out a way to convince them that it's really good for them, because ultimately they have to buy into it too. So we have to get much better at digging into needs and trying to, in a sense, steer the business to where they need to go, rather than just sort of being led where they want you to go. So the next thing we want to talk about is a couple of different sets of techniques for getting to real needs. So we'll talk about some changes in behavior that can help you get to better needs, and then some analytical techniques that might be useful in that process. So in the behavioral side, there are some different kinds of interviewing techniques for getting to real needs. So one of the examples that I like to use in this is to give the example of a business person comes and they say that they need a particular report. And I used to encounter this a lot, even from my very first job out of college. I was working as a business analyst, and we'd get people who would ask for this report or another report. And the important thing in that discussion to have is not to simply talk about what information do you want to see on the report and how do you want it sorted and where do you want totals and things like that, but to go behind that and say, well, what are you going to use the report for? Who's going to get it? How often do they need to get it? What do they do with it? What excuse me, what information are they looking for so that they can make certain kinds of decisions? So if we dig into this a bit more, then we might find that what they really want is not the report itself, but the ability to make the decision. And so the ability to make the decision is the real need, and there might be a number of different ways to look at that. So, for example, if we're working on a system that's going to report on project status or project health, so something that we probably all need to interact with, the thing that there's one way of approaching the problem is to say we need a weekly report that documents project status and indicates red, green, yellow indicators on project status, and maybe present some other information. But if we have the information at hand, another way to do it is to perhaps alert people when project status changes in some sort of adverse way. So it's not the periodic report that's important, it's the ability to be alerted when project status has changed so that you can take some action on it. So that then you may not want a periodic report at all that somebody then has to go wading through and looking at all the projects. You may want to have basically sort of an online dashboard, or you might have a text message to somebody when something changes, or there's a variety of different ways that you can solve the problem. Once you understand what the problem is that I need to take action on a problem project once it becomes a problem. So then you can focus on that kind of solution instead of optimizing the generation of a report that, for the most part, nobody's going to read, or they're going to ignore, or they may have to take time to wade through to figure out what's essentially the real projects they need to focus on, and what are the ones that are fine and they can just ignore safely. So these different techniques, interviewing techniques, might give us ways of finding out about that. So, as people ask for things, you have them tell you more about how they're going to use it, or help you understand how they're going to use that information or use that particular feature that they're asking for. You might wonder, if there's a particular capability that they need. Well, how are you going to test that? How do you know whether you've actually delivered that? So these kinds of questions get you thinking of ways to draw them out and go deeper into essentially what you want to find out is the why. So they're going to tell you what they want. What you need to figure out is why they want that. And from that, you can understand what they really need. And then you need to close the circle by coming back and say, well, if I understand what you're telling me, this is what you really need, and they might agree or disagree with that. And then you can say, so if we could provide some capability that would deliver that, it's not that feature that you're looking for, but it's the capability that ultimately satisfies the need, then generally most people I've worked with would say, yeah, that would be great. They really just need to have that need satisfied, and so you can get them off this asking for specific features. And even if that feature that they've asked for is the right thing, now you understand better what they really need, and you're more capable of delivering a solution that meets that need. So some other techniques that you might want to follow are some analytical techniques. So these give you, in addition to just asking different interviewing questions, these give you some ways to dig into the information that they're giving you to perhaps come up with root causes or understand the deeper need. So one particular approach is simply called the 5 whys approach, and it's called this because you just keep asking why until you figure out, until you feel like you're at the root cause. So, if somebody says, I need this report, you say, what? Why do you need the report? And then, they'd say, well, we need to report on project status. Why do you need to report on project status? Well, because we need to find out if projects are going off course or not so that we can take corrective action. So now you've come down to, in less than 5 questions, but we've now come down to something that sounds an awful lot like root causes. And you might go a little bit deeper and say, well, what kinds of corrective action might you take, and what information would you need to take that action? And now you've got something that's more useful than just saying, I need a report on project status. One of the challenges in that, usually when you ask why, you have to go back to those interviewing techniques, because if you just ask why, they might say, well, why are you questioning that I need that report? And so you have to figure out other ways of asking the question. And as I said before, I usually like to ask the question, what are you going to do with it? And then that leads down the path. So it's the actual question might be a little bit phrased differently than why do you want something? Now, if you have a problem that you're trying to solve, a fishbone diagram that's shown on the lower left here that allows us to analyze root causes might be a useful technique, and you see the mind map equivalent of that on the right. And what this does, it breaks a problem down into subproblems, and ultimately you identify root causes. So those are some useful techniques when you have a bit more of a complex problem that isn't simply, somebody wants some feature, but they've got, they say, well, we need a system that helps us figure out why defects are too high, and so you might dig into that a bit more with some of these techniques. The Pareto chart up on the upper right-hand corner is one that allows you to look at basically what's the data behind these contributing causes, and so you can then determine where you should be focusing most of your energy. So these different techniques give you some structured ways of analyzing the information, and the desired outcome analysis focuses on things like, well, ultimately, what are you trying to achieve? What are the business outcomes that you're looking to achieve? And then allows you to try to figure out from the requirements or features that you've been asked for, would those actually contribute to delivering those desired outcomes? So now, as we apply these techniques, then what usually happens is that you'll try to apply the technique. And what we've done over the last 20, 30, 40, probably since the beginning of IT, is that we've trained our users to basically expect that they're going to tell us what they want. We're going to, well, actually what their experience has been is that we're not going to deliver everything that they want, which is one of the reasons why they have to make everything high priority, because they know that anything that's low or medium priority is not going to get worked on. And so we've arranged this sort of elaborate game that we play, which is, I tell you everything I want. I know that I'm not going to get it all, so I'm going to ask for more than I actually want, because I know that I'm not going to get it all, and then we'll sort it out. And I'll still maybe end up being dissatisfied, but that's the game. So we want to try to overcome the resistance as we start to ask questions and focus more on needs. It's going to be a change in behavior for them, and so we need to have ways of working through that. So the first ingrained behavior that we have to try to overcome is our own belief that the customer is always right. And the customer in this case, by customer, IT people usually mean the business. And I'll talk in a moment about why that's not really accurate. Now, we've also ingrained that behavior in the users, and they think I am the customer and I'm always right. So, you're, meaning IT is subservient to the business, and just, the goal is I tell you what I want if I'm the business, and you're supposed to deliver it. So the problem with both of those is that the real customer is not the business. The real customer is the customer of the business, and we need to focus on what that customer needs and how do we deliver better products, solutions, services, you name it, across the board to meet the needs of those real customers. And everything needs to be subservient to doing that, because that's where business value is derived from. Now, we can also get general resistance to change. People might just say, well, I don't know why this process is this way. This is just always the way we've done it. So in that particular case, they may not be the right person to be talking to, or they might not have enough understanding of it. But certainly they're expressing a resistance to change in general, which you'll have to figure out a way to overcome that. And then sometimes desire to limit the scope of the change, so they may not feel empowered to change the business process, even though that might be the right solution. The worst, well, one of the worst things we can do, I guess I should say, is to take an inefficient or ineffective business process and simply optimize it through automation. So we want to step back, try to figure out if we need to change the way that the business works, then that probably needs to be in scope, and the people that we're talking to may not feel empowered to do that. So we have to be a little careful. One of the interesting observations I read about Henry Ford in the development of the automobile, he said, if I listened to my customers originally, what I would have developed was a faster horse. So technology can actually change the kind of solution that we deliver, and it has different characteristics perhaps than what people in the business are thinking of if they're locked into a particular business process. So as I said before, that one of the first things that we have to change is we have to collectively, with the business, recognize that they are not the customer, that there are real customers out there jointly of the business organization of which IT is a part, and the goal is to satisfy their needs. And so ultimately, and I know this sounds like an obvious statement to most people, but more often than not, I do hear people in IT organizations refer to the business as the customer, and this is kind of a big thing that's happened over the last 20 years. But we need to get away from that and realize that it's not a sort of customer-consumer relationship between IT and the business, but rather two parties who have different skills who need to work together to solve some real business problem. So if we focus on what are the needs of those and of the real customers, and what do we need to do collectively, IT and the business, to meet those needs, then that can help to shift. It's also really kind of a cultural shift that needs to involve the business leadership as well as IT leadership to change the way of interacting. And so this is something where it's a bottom-up change from the project team and business representative level, but sometimes it requires a top-down change as well to say, we need to figure out a way to work together, and we use the partnership word a lot, but we don't always act like we're really a partnership. So overcoming the resistance of working in a way, if the resistance is this is always the way we've done it, then as we identify needs, we need to jointly explore different ways of satisfying those needs and make sure that the people who are involved on both sides feel open to changing things, including business processes, and feel empowered to do so. So that might be a good question to ask the business representative, is that if we were able to find a better way to do this that involved both technology and changes to the business process, how would we explore that? What would be, how would we determine whether that's possible? And if they seem open to that kind of discussion, then you probably got a good relationship, good working relationship with that business partner. But if they don't feel open to it, then you might want to explore, well, what things would make it more possible to change the business processes? Is it a question of training cost? Is it a question of skill set? Is it are there other barriers that perhaps we don't understand that we would need to take into consideration? So oftentimes desiring to limit the scope of change, that's a natural response of any project team, and it's a good response. So we don't want to take on more change or more work than is really under scope. But if we focus on what outcome we need to achieve, then we might find that the easiest path is actually some joint change in the business process and in the system, and that actually is less work in the long run than continuing with current processes or current technology limitations. So you have to look at the big enough picture. So as we now think about project success criteria, if we're now thinking about project success as determined by delivering satisfied needs as opposed to sets of features, then this changes the way that we think about success and scope and other things. So first off, if we can agree on what needs need to be satisfied as opposed to what features need to be in or out, that's really the first step. And the good thing is that there are far fewer needs typically than there are features. And so you're working with a smaller set of things, even though the scope of those things might be bigger. And then as we work through those, we look at the needs and we prioritize, and we like to use the must, should, could, and won't kind of scheme. But sometimes the users and business representatives are pretty smart, and they realize that if they say won't, of course we won't do that. If they say W. And that probably we won't do the coulds either, and maybe we won't even get to the shoulds. And so they're smart, and they put must on everything, or must on the majority of things. So the way that we get around this particular problem is we force rank the musts. So we say, great, those are all musts, but clearly within those, some of them are more important than others, and you force them into a list where they have to be in rank ordered fashion. And then you start going back and you look at the overall cost and schedule and estimates and things like that, and you try to figure out, well, what could we actually do? And if you could do all the musts, then that's wonderful. But now you've got a rank ordered list, so now as you work through budget and schedule, if you figure out, well, we can't even do all the musts, then you have a way of making the decision of where the cutoff is. And it's and in many cases you find out that the musts aren't really musts. But if we focus on needs as opposed to features, we have fewer of those to deal with. And it may be that now that we have a clearer picture, remember back to that 30% of requirements that are never used in most systems, or more in some cases, we can go back through, and perhaps what we've eliminated is the things that people wouldn't use anyway. And keep in mind that those 30% of requirements that got implemented that were never used, somebody said those were musts. Those got into real systems, and so by force ranking and really kind of tying it back to business needs, then we have a way to negotiate the scope back to something that's reasonable and in many cases fits within the budget and time available. But we have to get people off features because that doesn't allow us to have a discussion at the right level. So when we look at milestone reviews, we should look at evaluating progress toward needs satisfaction as opposed to how many features have we implemented or what's the status on this particular feature. So, you know, it's ultimately the needs satisfaction that's important to the business, not a particular feature, unless we can tie it directly back to satisfying a need. So, you know, as we use needs to manage scope, if somebody proposes a new requirement or a new feature, or even a new use case, or whatever technique you're using for requirements, if we can't tie that back to some sort of need satisfaction, then, you know, we clearly have something that, well, it could be that we don't understand there's a need missing, but in many cases it's just, you know, sort of the proverbial bell and whistle that, you know, would be nice to have, but of course if it doesn't tie back to a need, we really shouldn't be developing it. So as a summary, we've talked about this focus on needs and the importance of focusing on needs and getting past the wants so that we can really understand what's needed, what we need to deliver. In order to do that, I'm not sort of in any way underestimating the difficulty in getting people to change the way they look at things. So this is it's a cultural shift, and it requires people to change the behaviors and the way they look at things. But using facilitation techniques and problem-solving techniques to aid in that transformation, it gives us some tools to affect that shift in culture and to have a more meaningful dialogue about what's really needed. So as we get people more focused on needs and away from wants and useless features or features that would never be used by anyone, then it gives us a better way to tie what we're doing back to business value. And then, you know, in some respects, we are, whether we like it or not, we're measured on the value that we deliver back to the business. And so this is a more concrete way of tying what we do back to things that are important to the business. So if we define project success criteria in terms of satisfaction of needs and wants, that also encourages the right behaviors. So hopefully in this, in our short ways to think about how you can better satisfy needs, giving you some techniques for digging into those needs and getting past the usual long list of wishes that your business representatives might have, and then some techniques for overcoming resistance and getting this more integrated into the overall project management scheme in your organization. So we've got some time for questions, so I'll turn it back to Leanne for that.
Thank you very much, Kurt. I'll just move. So just as people, I'll give you the opportunity to submit questions if you have not, and I know I do have a few already. But a couple of things to note is the next webcast is set for November 3rd. In that webcast, Kurt will be presenting a continuation of this topic on how to review results and set expectations. And of course, we have a wealth of information on our website, additional webcasts, white papers, etc., that you're welcome to browse. And one item I wanted to highlight today was a new case study that was just launched today, actually, on KPN's measurement framework. And this came out of a webcast series we did in the spring with Ian Spence that some of you may have sat in on. So if you're interested, you can find that on our website as well. And I will begin questions. I'm just scrolling. Oh, we do have quite a few, so we'll start. So Kurt, this approach seems to be addressed at big waterfall developments. Is the problem of giving users more what they want resolved also through agile development techniques?
So partially. So the agile development techniques are good for establishing a way to provide quick feedback. So as I said before, the users don't know what they want, but they know what they don't want when they see it. So, you know, in an agile project, what will happen is that they'll specify some user stories, and then you'll build it, and they'll say, nah, that's not quite exactly what I meant, and then you can refine that. But what these techniques allow you to do is to refine those user stories as they are developed, so that they more accurately describe what they want to achieve. So, you know, I've seen good user stories and I've seen bad ones. And the bad ones are ones that basically are just specifications of a feature kind of model. So I think these techniques are all equally applicable to Agile environments. In fact, the Agile environments give you a way to have a more interactive dialogue throughout the project. So they aren't just adapted towards large waterfall development.
All right, thank you. The next question, are you suggesting that any focus on features is counterproductive? And if so, do you see feature discussions relevant at all?
So I am not a fan of features because I think that they don't focus on basically the real needs. Where features might be useful is as an example of the kind of thing that the user thinks might be useful. And then jointly, as you work through what the real need is, then you might come back and specify, sort of re-specify the features in a more sort of useful way. Now, I prefer using things like user stories or use cases and other things as opposed to features. So I like a different form of expressing what that behavior is rather than a feature, because I like to tie it together into some sort of story that delivers value, and we won't get into the specific techniques you might do to use that, but to do that. But so I think it's you might start with features, but only because that's the vocabulary of the user that you're talking to, but then work backwards to figure out what the real needs are, and then specify how you're going to satisfy those needs in terms of stories or in terms of use cases or in terms of some other kind of thing that has a bit more holistic picture of end-to-end delivery of business value.
Okay, thank you. What is your opinion of visualization tools that help users to understand their needs?
I think visualization tools are great. And there's an implicit but in there. I have found that users often get so enamored with the way things look that they spend most of their time worried about look and feel concerns, and they don't focus on real needs. So they get all focused. They're basically attracted to shiny objects, and so they start over specifying the look and feel and not talking about what's the business outcome that they're trying to achieve. So a lot of that is in the skill of the person who's facilitating that session or sessions multiple to try to get them to focus on what they're really trying to achieve. And I like to do that before we go into a visualization session, but of course it's interactive, and as people see things and as we walk through the process and walk through how they're going to use the system to achieve those needs, then new needs come up, and so it's a useful facilitation technique, but you do have to be careful that it doesn't just turn into a UI specification exercise.
Okay, thank you. And I've had a couple of questions on availability of this presentation. So just a note that the recording of this session will be made available tomorrow, and all attendees actually will receive an email with a link to the recording. So that will be sent out by tomorrow. So that answers that question, those questions. I have another question, which Kurt, is probably more material relating on our website, but I'll ask it in case you wanted to add something else to that. Are there resources available that demonstrate good user stories? I don't know if there's any thoughts you had on that you wanted to add.
As Leon mentioned, we've got some white papers on various different requirements techniques, and so beyond this is. So in direct answer to the person, yes, we've got some information on our website. There's also a number of books on user stories itself. Mike Cohn's book or books multiple on user stories are I think quite good. And then we've got other information on our website about a variety of different requirements techniques that you might use. And I think Leanne mentioned this before, but I'll emphasize some recorded webinars and white papers on some of the different problem analysis techniques that I walk through, and you might find that useful as well.
Okay, thank you. And I'm just reviewing a list just to make sure I've caught all the questions, and I believe I have. So those are all the questions we have at the moment. Kurt, I don't know if you have any last thoughts before we wrap up
Well,
that you wanted to add?
Yeah, we have a number of webinars coming up. So the next one is talking more about how do you review progress. So it does relate back to the question about the visualization and also the agile development. How do you handle those user feedback sessions, and how do you use them to your maximal advantage to get better information, as well as communicating project status and other things that are important to make sure that people understand all the good work you're doing. So that's a plug for one of the future sessions. We've also got a bunch of recorded webinars that you might find interesting on the website. Some interesting white papers and that kind of information. So please take advantage of those resources, and hope you find them valuable.
Great. Thank you very much, Kurt, and thank you everyone for attending today. That's the end of our session. Thank you.